I was standing in the kitchen doorway, frozen with a tray of sandwiches in my hands, when I heard my sister Carmen say the words that would change everything. Her voice carried that familiar tone of casual cruelty, the kind she'd perfected over 28 years of being the beautiful one, the successful one, the one everyone expected great things from. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Honestly, Eunice needs to face reality, she said, not bothering to lower her voice even though she knew I was in the next room. She's 26, still living at home, and let's be honest, no decent man is going to want someone who looks like that and has nothing to offer. The sandwich tray trembled in my grip. Through the archway I could see Carmen perched on our worn velvet couch like she owned the place, her perfectly manicured nails gesturing dismissively as she spoke to our mother. Mom sat across from her, nodding along with that tight-lipped expression she wore whenever the conversation turned to my failures. I mean, look at her, Carmen continued, oblivious to the fact that I could hear every word. She's gained weight, she dresses like she shops at thrift stores, and she has no ambition. What successful man wants to deal with that baggage? She should focus on getting a real job instead of chasing fantasies about finding love. My name is Eunice Powell, and that moment in the kitchen doorway wasn't the first time I'd been reminded of my place in the family hierarchy. But it was the moment everything crystallized. At 26, I was the disappointment, the afterthought, the daughter who never quite measured up to expectation. While Carmen had sailed through life collecting achievements like trophies, homecoming queen, sorority president, marketing executive with a corner office downtown, I had stumbled through a series of false starts and quiet defeats. We lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Riverside Heights, one of those complexes built in the 70s that had seen better decades. The walls were thin, the carpet was stained, and the heater made ominous rattling sounds all winter long. Mom had moved us there after Dad left when I was 12, and somehow we'd never managed to climb out of that particular rut. Carmen had her own place now, a sleek downtown loft that she loved to post about on social media, but she still came by every few weeks to hold court in our living room and remind us all of how well she was doing. I had always been the quiet one, the bookish one, the one who preferred spending Saturday nights reading romance novels to painting the town red. In high school, while Carmen was dating the quarterback and getting crowned prom queen, I was tutoring struggling students in the library and writing poetry I never showed anyone. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was simply a different kind of person, that there was nothing wrong with being introverted and thoughtful, but families have a way of wearing you down with their expectations, or in my case, their complete lack of them. Every family gathering became an exercise in measuring myself against Carmen's accomplishments. Every conversation eventually circled back to when I was going to get a real job, when I was going to lose weight, when I was going to get my act together. The questions came wrapped in concern, but the subtext was always clear. I was falling behind in the race of life, and everyone was getting tired of waiting for me to catch up. The irony was that I did have a job, one that I loved but that my family refused to take seriously. I worked as a freelance research assistant for various professors at the local university, helping them compile data for academic papers and books. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't pay enough to move out on my own, but it suited my methodical nature and my love of learning. I spent my days diving deep into subjects ranging from medieval history to environmental science, connecting dots and finding patterns that others missed. But try explaining that to a family that measured success solely in terms of salary figures and office title. To them, working from home in my pajamas wasn't a career, it was an extended adolescence, a refusal to join the adult world. Never mind that I had helped 3 professors publish groundbreaking research, or that I had developed a reputation for thoroughness and insight among the academic community. If it didn't come with health insurance and a 401k, it didn't count. The dating situation was even more complicated. It wasn't that I was hideous or completely hopeless. I had shoulder-length brown hair that caught golden highlights in the sun, green eyes that my college roommate used to say were my best feature, and a smile that could light up a room when I felt confident enough to use it. But confidence was something that had been slowly eroded over years of being the other daughter, the one who didn't quite fit the mold of what a successful young woman was supposed to be. I had dated, but sporadically and without much success. There was Marcus in college, a philosophy major who broke up with me because he said I was too intense about books. Then came David, a guy I met at a coffee shop who seemed interested until he realized I lived with my mother and worked part-time jobs. Most recently, there had been Trevor, a fellow freelancer who I thought might understand my unconventional lifestyle but who ultimately decided he needed someone more ambitious and more put together. Each failed relationship added another layer to the story my family told about me. Poor Eunice, they would whisper. She just can't seem to find anyone. Maybe if she tried harder with her appearance, maybe if she got a real job, maybe if she moved out and showed some independence. The suggestions came from a place of supposed helpfulness, but they all carried the same underlying message. The problem was me. That afternoon, standing in the kitchen with the sandwich tray, listening to Carmen dissect my romantic prospects with surgical precision, something inside me finally snapped. Not in a dramatic, explosive way, but in the quiet manner of a thread that has been pulled too tight for too long. I set the tray down on the counter and walked back to my bedroom, closing the door with the soft click of someone who has decided to stop participating in her own humiliation. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around the room that had been my sanctuary for over a decade. The walls were lined with bookshelves, packed with everything from classic literature to contemporary romance novels. My desk was covered with research materials for my current project, a paper on urban development patterns that I was helping Dr. Harrison complete. In the corner sat my grandmother's old sewing machine, the one I used to mend clothes and create the simple dresses that Carmen dismissed as thrift store chic. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to really think about what I wanted my life to look like. Not what my family expected, not what society demanded, but what would actually make me happy. I wanted to feel valued for my intelligence and my contributions. I wanted someone to see past my quiet demeanor and appreciate the depth underneath. I wanted to stop apologizing for taking up space in the world, but mostly I wanted to prove that Carmen was wrong. I wanted to show them all that there was more to me than they had ever bothered to notice, that their narrow definition of success and desirability was just that narrow. I didn't need to become someone else to find love and happiness. I needed to become more myself, more unapologetically and authentically me. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. At the top, I typed life goals and then sat staring at the blank page for a long time. Finally, I began to write. Not a list of things I should do to make myself more acceptable to others, but a manifesto of sorts, a declaration of who I was and what I stood for. I am intelligent, compassionate, and creative, I wrote. I am worthy of love and respect exactly as I am. I will not shrink myself to fit into other people's expectations, and I will not accept less than I deserve simply because others cannot see my value. It was a small act of rebellion, just words on a screen that no one else would ever see. But it felt like the first real thing I had done in years, the first step toward reclaiming my own narrative. I didn't know then that this quiet moment of self-assertion would set in motion a chain of events that would completely transform my life. I just knew that I was tired of being dismissed, tired of being overlooked and ready to do something about it. The next morning I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. I put on my favorite dress, a deep blue one I had sewn myself that brought out my eyes, and decided to walk to the library instead of working from home. Sometimes a change of scenery was exactly what a person needed to see possibilities that had been there all along. As I gathered my research materials and headed for the door, I could hear Carmen and Mom already deep in conversation about wedding planning. Carmen had gotten engaged 6 months ago to a lawyer named Brad, and the event had consumed every family gathering since. The wedding was still 8 months away, but according to Carmen there were a million details that required constant attention and discussion. The flowers alone are going to cost more than most people spend on their entire wedding, Carmen was saying as I passed through the living room. But Brad says nothing is too good for his bride. I murmured a goodbye and headed out into the crisp October morning. The walk to the library took me through the heart of downtown, past the coffee shops and boutiques where young professionals grabbed their morning caffeine and planned their important day. I had always felt like an outsider in this world, like someone watching life happen through a window, but today felt different. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Today I walked with my shoulders back and my head up, determined to stop apologizing for being exactly who I was. The university library was my second home, a grand old building with high ceilings and the kind of atmosphere that made you want to whisper even when no one else was around. I had a favorite spot on the third floor, tucked away between the psychology and sociology sections, where I could spread out my materials and work in peace. Dr. Harrison's research project was fascinating. A comprehensive study of how housing policies had shaped urban communities over the past 50 years, and I had spent weeks tracking down obscure city planning documents and interviewing longtime residents about the changes they had witnessed. I was deep in concentration, cross-referencing property records with demographic data, when someone cleared their throat softly beside my table. I looked up to find a man standing there holding a stack of books and wearing an apologetic smile. "Excuse me," he said. "I hate to bother you, but I think you might be using some of the source materials I reserved for today." He was tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair that looked like he had run his fingers through it and warm brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a simple button-down shirt and jeans, the kind of understated outfit that suggested he put thought into his appearance without trying too hard. There was something immediately appealing about him, a combination of intelligence and kindness that seemed to radiate from his expression. "Oh, I'm so sorry," I said, immediately starting to gather up the urban planning journals I had spread across the table. "I didn't realize they were reserved. I can find somewhere else to work." "No, please," he said quickly, setting his books down on the chair across from me. "There's plenty of space. I just need a couple of those journals when you're finished with them. I'm working on something related, housing development patterns in mid-sized cities." I looked up at him with surprise. "Really? I'm researching urban development too, but focusing on policy impacts over time. Are you working on your dissertation?" He laughed, a warm sound that made something flutter in my chest. "I wish it were that simple. I'm actually working on a community development project downtown." "My name is Marcus Chen, by the way. Eunice Powell," I replied, offering my hand. His grip was firm and warm, and he held my gaze with the kind of direct attention that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. "Well, Eunice Powell, would you be interested in sharing this table and maybe comparing notes? I have a feeling we might be looking at some of the same issues from different angles." And just like that, my carefully ordered world shifted slightly on its axis. I had come to the library to escape my family's judgments and focus on work that made me feel valuable. I hadn't expected to meet someone who looked at me like I might have something interesting to say, someone whose smile made me suddenly aware of my heart. "I'd like that," I said, and meant it more than I had meant anything in a long time. As Marcus settled into the chair across from me and began spreading out his own research materials, I caught myself stealing glances at him. There was something different about the way he moved through the world, a quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. When he asked me about Dr. Harrison's research, he listened to my answer with genuine interest, asking follow-up questions that showed he understood the complexity of what I was trying to accomplish. For the next 3 hours we worked side by side, occasionally sharing a relevant article or discussing a particularly interesting finding. Marcus was working on a proposal for affordable housing development in the downtown area, and his passion for the project was evident in every word he spoke. He talked about creating communities rather than just buildings, about the importance of preserving neighborhood character while still providing opportunities for growth. "The hardest part," he said, looking up from a zoning document, "is convincing people that development doesn't have to mean displacement, that you can improve a community without destroying what made it special in the first place." I found myself nodding enthusiastically. That's exactly what Dr. Harrison's research is showing. The most successful urban development projects are the ones that involve existing residents in the planning process, that build on community strengths rather than trying to start from scratch. Marcus leaned back in his chair and studied me with those warm brown eyes. You really know this stuff. Have you considered going back to school for urban planning? With your research background and your obvious passion for the subject, you'd probably do really well in a graduate program. The suggestion caught me off guard. I had never thought of myself as graduate school material, had never imagined that my freelance research work could lead to something bigger and more official. I don't know, I said slowly. I've never really seen myself as the academic type. Really? Marcus looked genuinely surprised, because from where I'm sitting, you seem like exactly the academic type. You're thorough, insightful, and you clearly love learning. What makes you think you wouldn't be successful in a formal program? It was such a simple question, but it hit me like a physical blow. What did make me think I wouldn't be successful? Years of being told I wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't focused enough, wasn't enough, period. Years of accepting my family's assessment of my limitations as gospel truth. I guess I've just never thought of myself that way, I said finally. Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying my face with an expression I couldn't quite read. Well, he said eventually, maybe it's time to start thinking of yourself differently. When the library announced its closing time over the intercom, I was genuinely surprised to discover that the entire afternoon had passed without my noticing. Marcus and I packed up our materials slowly, both of us seeming reluctant to end whatever this had been. Would you maybe like to continue this conversation over coffee sometime? He asked as we walked toward the exit together. I mean, the research conversation, and maybe other conversations too. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but I managed to meet his eyes when I answered, I'd really like that. We exchanged phone numbers outside the library, and Marcus promised to call me the next day to set up a proper coffee date. As I walked home through the downtown streets, I felt lighter than I had in months. Someone had looked at me and seen potential. Someone had listened to my ideas and found them worth engaging with. Someone had suggested that maybe, just maybe, I was exactly the right type of person for the things I loved. I was still glowing with the after effects of that conversation when I walked through the front door of our apartment. Carmen was in the kitchen, standing over the stove with a glass of wine in her hand, clearly making herself at home, while Mom was at her evening shift at the department store. There you are, she said without looking up from whatever she was stirring. Mom was wondering where you disappeared to all day. She needed help with some wedding stuff. I was at the library working, I said, setting my bag down on the counter. Carmen glanced over at me then, and I saw her take in my appearance with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years cataloging my shortcomings. You're all flushed. Are you feeling okay? I'm fine, I said quickly. Just had a productive day. She turned back to the stove with a shrug. Well, try to be around tomorrow. Mom really does need help with the seating chart, and I can't do everything myself. Brad and I have that venue walk through it too. I nodded and started to head toward my room, but Carmen's voice stopped me at the doorway. Oh, and you might want to do something about your hair. It looked kind of messy when you came in. I reached up instinctively to smooth down my hair, which had gotten a bit windblown during my walk home, but then I stopped myself. Marcus hadn't seemed to notice anything wrong with my hair. In fact, he had looked at me like I was perfectly fine exactly as I was. Thanks for the feedback, I said calmly, and continued toward my room. That night, I lay in bed, replaying every moment of my afternoon with Mark. The way he had listened when I spoke, the way he had taken my ideas seriously, the way he had suggested I might be capable of more than I had ever imagined. It had been so long since someone had looked at me and seen possibility instead of limitation. I thought about Carmen's automatic criticism, the way she couldn't let me pass through a room without finding something to fix or improve about me. I thought about the years I had spent accepting those small corrections as truth, letting them shape my perception of myself, until I could barely recognize my own worth. But Marcus had seen something different. Marcus had looked at the same person Carmen found lacking, and suggested graduate school, had asked me out for coffee, had treated me like someone whose company was worth seeking out. Maybe the problem wasn't with me at all. Maybe the problem was with people who were so busy looking for flaws that they couldn't see anything else. I fell asleep that night with Marcus's words echoing in my mind. Maybe it's time to start thinking of yourself differently. It seemed like such a simple concept, but it felt revolutionary. What would happen if I stopped seeing myself through my family's eyes and started trusting my own perception? What would happen if I started believing that I was exactly the right person to want the things I wanted? I didn't know it yet, but I was about to find out. The morning after my library encounter with Marcus, I woke up with an unfamiliar sensation bubbling in my chest. It took me a moment to identify it as hope. For the first time in months, I had something to look forward to beyond the endless cycle of research deadlines and family obligations. Marcus had said he would call today to arrange our coffee date, and I found myself checking my phone every few minutes as I went through my morning routine. I was in the middle of brushing my teeth when Carmen's voice echoed through the apartment, sharp and demanding as always. Can you come here for a minute? I need to talk to you about something. I rinsed my mouth and padded down the hallway in my robe and slippers, finding Carmen perched at our small dining table with her laptop open, and what appeared to be wedding planning materials spread across every available surface. She had clearly been there for a while, judging by the empty coffee mug at her elbow and the way she had taken over the space like she was conducting a board meeting. "Sit down," she said without looking up from her screen. "I've been thinking about what we discussed yesterday, and I've decided to do something about your situation." I sank into the chair across from her, immediately wary. Carmen's attempts to help with my situation had a long and painful history. There was the time she signed me up for a dating website without my knowledge, using photos she had taken without permission, and a profile description that made me sound desperate. There was the makeover she had insisted on giving me for my birthday 2 years ago, which had left me looking like a completely different person and feeling deeply uncomfortable in my own skin. Her interventions always came from a place of supposed love, but they invariably made me feel worse about myself than I had before. "I don't really have a situation that needs solving," I said carefully. Carmen finally looked up at me, her expression a mixture of pity and determination that I had seen many times before. "Eunice, honey, you're 26 years old and you've never had a serious relationship. You live at home, you work part-time jobs that barely pay the bills, and you spend most of your free time reading books about other people's lives instead of actually living your own. If that's not a situation that needs addressing, I don't know what is." Each word felt like a small slap, delivered with the casual cruelty that Carmen had perfected over the years. She had a talent for making her criticisms sound like concern, for packaging her judgments in the language of sisterly love. It was a technique that had kept me off balance for most of my adult life, never quite sure if I was being helped or attacked. "I'm happy with my work," I said quietly, "and I am living my life, just not the way you think I should." Carmen laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Oh, come on. You can't seriously tell me that hiding in the library doing research for other people is fulfilling. You're wasting your potential, and frankly, it's getting embarrassing. Do you know what people say when they ask about you? They feel sorry for me because my sister can't get her act together." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I had always suspected that Carmen was ashamed of me, but hearing it stated so baldly was more painful than I had expected. "What people?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Everyone," she said with a shrug. "My coworkers, Brad's friends, people at the country club. They ask about my family and I have to explain that my little sister is still trying to find herself. It's awkward, Eunice. I shouldn't have to make excuses for you." I stared at her, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. "I didn't realize I was such a burden to you." "You're not a burden," Carmen said quickly, though her tone suggested otherwise. "You're just not reaching your potential. That's why I've decided to help you. I've been talking to Brad, and we think we have a solution." She turned her laptop toward me, revealing what appeared to be a dating profile on an expensive-looking matchmaking website. The photo was one I didn't recognize, clearly taken from a distance and edited to make me look thinner and more polished than I actually was. The profile description talked about a sweet, traditional girl looking for a stable relationship in language that sounded nothing like anything I would ever say about myself. Brad knows this guy through work, Carmen continued, oblivious to my growing horror. His name is Gregory Huntsman, and he's perfect for you. He's 34, works in insurance, owns his own house, and he's looking for someone who wants to settle down and start a family. He's not the most exciting guy in the world, but he's stable and decent, and frankly, I think he's probably the best you're going to do. I stared at the profile, trying to process what was happening. You created a dating profile for me without asking. I knew you'd overthink it if I asked first, Carmen said dismissively. You always find reasons not to put yourself out there. Sometimes you need someone to push you in the right direction. And this Gregory person thinks he's talking to me. Well, technically he's been talking to me pretending to be you, Carmen admitted without a trace of shame. But don't worry, I've been very careful to keep it general. I haven't made any promises or anything. I just thought you should meet him before you dismiss the idea entirely. The room felt like it was tilting around me. You've been impersonating me online to a complete stranger. I've been helping you, Carmen corrected sharply, and you should be grateful. Do you know how hard it is to find a decent man who's willing to date someone in your position? Gregory is a catch, and he's interested in meeting you. I've arranged for you to have lunch with him on Saturday. I stood up so abruptly that my chair scraped against the floor. Absolutely not. I'm not going on a date with someone who thinks he's been talking to a completely different person, and I'm certainly not going to pretend to be whoever you've been impersonating. Carmen's expression hardened. Don't be dramatic, Eunice. It's just lunch. What's the worst that could happen? The worst that could happen is that I'd be starting a relationship based on a complete lie, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. The worst that could happen is that I'd be going out with someone you think is the best I can do instead of someone who might actually appreciate who I am. And who exactly is going to appreciate who you are? Carmen snapped, her mask of concern finally slipping. You think some Prince Charming is going to walk into the library and fall in love with your research skills. You think someone is going to see past your complete lack of ambition and your refusal to take care of yourself and decide you're worth pursuing. Wake up, Eunice. This is the real world, and in the real world, you have to work with what you've got. The words hung in the air between us like poison. For a moment neither of us spoke, and I could hear the tick of the kitchen clock marking the seconds of my humiliation. Carmen's face showed no regret, no awareness that she had just torn me apart with surgical precision. She simply looked impatient, like she was waiting for me to accept the truth of what she had said and move on. Delete the profile, I said quietly. Eunice, be reasonable. Delete it now or I'll report it to the website as identity theft. Carmen's eyes flashed with anger. Fine. But don't come crying to me when you're 40 and still living in this apartment, because you were too proud to accept help when it was off. She snapped her laptop shut and gathered her wedding planning materials with sharp, aggressive movements. I'm trying to help you here, but if you want to stay stuck in your little fantasy world where someone is going to magically appear and love you exactly as you are, that's your choice. Just remember that when you're wondering why you're still alone. She swept out of the apartment like a storm front, leaving me standing in the wreckage of what had once been a perfectly ordinary morning. I sank back into my chair and put my head in my hands, trying to process what had just happened. Carmen had created a fake dating profile, using my photo, had been impersonating me to a stranger, had arranged a date without my knowledge or consent, and somehow I was the unreasonable one for refusing to go along with it. The worst part was the grain of truth buried in her cruelty. I was 26 and living at home. I hadn't had a serious relationship in years. My career was unconventional and uncertain. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was being foolishly romantic to think that someone would want me exactly as I was. My phone buzzed against the table, and I looked down to see Marcus's name on the screen. For a moment I just stared at it, Carmen's words echoing in my head. You think some Prince Charming is going to walk into the library and fall in love with your research skills? But then I remembered the way Marcus had looked at me yesterday, the genuine interest in his eyes when I talked about Dr. Harrison's project, the way he had suggested I consider graduate school like it was a perfectly natural next step for someone like me. I answered the phone. Hi, Eunice. It's Marcus. From the library yesterday. Hi, I said, surprised by how much better I felt just hearing his voice. I was wondering if you'd like to get that coffee today. I know it's short notice, but I'm downtown this morning anyway, and there's this great little place near the university that I think you'd like. I glanced around the apartment, still cluttered with the remnants of Carmen's intervention, and made a decision. I'd love to. What time? How about 11? It's called The Daily Grind, on 5th Street near the campus bookstore. I'll see you there, I said, and meant it. After I hung up, I went to my room and stood in front of my closet for a long time. Carmen's voice whispered in my head, cataloging all the ways I didn't measure up, all the reasons no decent man would want me. But then I thought about Marcus asking me about graduate school, about the way he had listened to my ideas like they mattered. I chose a simple green dress that I had made myself, one that fit well, and made me feel confident. I did my makeup carefully but not dramatically, the way I liked it rather than the way Carmen thought I should wear it. I looked at myself in the mirror and tried to see what Marcus might see instead of what Carmen always pointed out. The walk to the Daily Grind took me through the heart of the university district, past familiar buildings and tree-lined paths that had always felt like home to me. The coffee shop was exactly the kind of place I loved, cozy and unpretentious, with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. Marcus was already there when I arrived, sitting at a small table near the window with 2 steaming mugs in front of him. "I hope you don't mind," he said as I approached, "but I took the liberty of ordering for you. You seemed like a chai latte person." He was right, and I told him so as I settled into the chair across from him. We fell into conversation as easily as we had the day before, talking about books and travel and the downtown development project he was working on. Marcus had a way of asking questions that made me think, that drew out thoughts and opinions I didn't even know I had. "So tell me about your family," he said after we had been talking for nearly an hour. "Do they support your work?" The question caught me off guard, mainly because no one had ever asked it before. Most people assumed that if I was living at home and working freelance jobs, my family must be worried about me, or disappointed in my choices. "It's complicated," I said finally. "They don't really understand what I do. They think I should get a more traditional job, something with benefits and a clear career path." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That's hard. It's tough to pursue something you're passionate about when the people closest to you don't see the value in it. They think I'm wasting my potential," I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "My sister especially. She's very successful, very put together, and she thinks I'm just drifting through life without any real goals or ambitions." "What do you think?" Marcus asked quietly. The question was so simple, but it hit me like a revelation. What did I think? When was the last time someone had asked for my opinion about my own life instead of telling me what I should be doing with it? "I think I love learning," I said slowly. "I think research makes me feel useful and fulfilled in a way that nothing else ever has. I think maybe my path looks different from other people's, but that doesn't mean it's wrong." Marcus smiled, the kind of warm, genuine expression that reached his eyes. "I think you're absolutely right, and for what it's worth, I think your sister is wrong about you. You're not drifting, you're exploring. You're building skills, you're contributing to important work. That's not wasting potential, that's cultivating it." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, and I blinked them back quickly. "Thank you for saying that. I'm not just saying it, I mean it. You have this amazing ability to see connections and patterns that other people miss." Yesterday, when you were talking about the relationship between housing policy and community development, you made observations that I've never heard anyone else make. That's not common, Eunice. That's a gift. We talked for another hour, and by the time Marcus walked me back to my car, I felt like a completely different person than the one who had been torn apart in her own kitchen that morning. He asked if he could see me again, and when I said yes, he smiled like I had just made his day. "I'm really glad I met you," he said as we stood beside my car. "I have a feeling you're going to surprise a lot of people." I drove home in a haze of happiness, Carmen's cruel words temporarily forgotten in the glow of Marcus's attention. But as I walked through the front door of our apartment, reality came crashing back. Mom was in the living room, clearly waiting for me with an expression on her face that suggested Carmen had briefed her on our morning conversation. "Sit down, honey," Mom said in the tone she used when she was trying to be patient, but was actually frustrated. "Carmen told me what happened this morning, and I think we need to talk." I perched on the edge of the couch, still wearing the confidence Marcus had given me like armor. "If this is about the dating profile, she had no right to create that without asking me. She was trying to help you," Mom said firmly, "and frankly I think you were foolish to turn down the chance to meet someone stable and decent. Do you know how hard it is to find a good man these days? Especially for someone in your situation." There it was again, my situation. The thing that defined me in everyone else's eyes. The problem that needed to be solved. "What exactly is my situation, Mom?" Mom looked surprised by the question. "Well, you're not getting any younger, sweetheart, and you're not exactly making it easy for men to find you attractive. You work from home, you don't go out much, you don't make an effort with your appearance. Carmen is right, you need to be more realistic about your options." "What if I don't want to settle for someone who only wants me because I'm realistic about my options?" I asked. "What if I want someone who actually likes me?" "That's a luxury you might not be able to afford," Mom said bluntly. "Look, I know this is hard to hear, but you're not Carmen. You don't have her advantages. You need to work with what you have instead of holding out for some romantic fantasy." The conversation continued in the same vein for another 20 minutes, with Mom patiently explaining all the ways I was sabotaging my own chances at happiness by having standards that were too high for someone like me. She meant well. I knew both she and Carmen genuinely believed they were helping me by lowering my expectations and pushing me toward men who would accept my limitations. But as I sat there listening to my mother catalog my romantic shortcomings, I couldn't stop thinking about the way Marcus had looked at me over coffee, like I was interesting, like I was worth getting to know, like my thoughts and opinions mattered. "I met someone," I said suddenly, interrupting Mom's lecture about the importance of compromise in relationships. Mom stopped mid-sentence and stared at me. "You what?" "I met someone yesterday at the library. We had coffee this morning, and he wants to see me again." For a moment, Mom looked genuinely pleased. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. Tell me about him. What does he do? Where did he go to school? Is he looking for something serious?" "His name is Marcus, and he works in community development. He's intelligent and kind, and he thinks I should consider graduate school." Mom's expression shifted slightly. "Graduate school? In what?" "Urban planning, maybe. He thinks I have a talent for research and analysis." Now Mom looked worried. "Eunice, that sounds like someone trying to flatter you. Men will say things like that when they're trying to get close to you. You need to be careful not to get carried away by sweet talk." "It wasn't sweet talk," I said firmly. "It was a genuine conversation about my work and my interests." "And what does this Marcus person do, exactly? Does he have a stable job? Benefits? A plan for the future?" I realized I didn't know the answers to most of those questions, and the uncertainty must have shown on my face, because Mom pounced on it immediately. "You see, you're getting swept up in romance instead of asking the practical questions. This is exactly what Carmen was talking about. You need to think with your head, not your heart." But as Mom continued her lecture about the importance of financial stability and clear intentions, I found myself thinking about the way Marcus had talked about his work, the passion in his voice when he described his vision for community development. He wasn't just someone with a stable job and benefits. He was someone who cared about making a difference. Someone who saw possibility where others saw problems. Someone, I realized, who saw me the way I wanted to be seen. That evening, Carmen returned to continue her campaign to convince me that I was making a mistake by rejecting Gregory Huntsman and his insurance company's stability. She had brought reinforcements in the form of her fiancé Brad, a perfectly nice man who nevertheless had the unfortunate habit of agreeing with everything Carmen said, and treating me like a wayward child who needed gentle guidance. "The thing is, Eunice," Brad said, as the three of us sat around our small dining table, "sometimes we have to be strategic about dating. I mean, I'm sure this library guy seems interesting, but what's his long-term potential? Does he own property? Is he established in his career? These are the kinds of questions you need to be asking. Carmen nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. And Gregory checks all those boxes. He owns a 3-bedroom house in Meadowbrook. He's been with his company for 8 years. And he's specifically looking for someone to settle down with. That's not romantic, maybe, but it's real. I listened to them dissect my romantic prospects like they were analyzing a business investment, and I felt something harden inside me. They weren't talking about love or compatibility, or even basic attraction. They were talking about transactions, about what I could realistically expect to get in exchange for what I had to offer. What if I want more than just stability? I asked. Carmen and Brad exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Of course you want more, Carmen said in the tone she might use with a small child. Everyone wants the fairy tale, but part of growing up is learning to separate fantasy from reality. Romance fades. What matters in the long run is whether someone can provide for you and treat you decently. And what makes you think this Gregory person would treat me decently? I asked. You've been impersonating me to him for weeks. How do you know anything about his character? I know enough, Carmen said defensively. He's polite, he has a good job, and he's looking for commitment. What more do you need to know? Maybe I need to know if we have anything in common. Maybe I need to know if he makes me laugh, or if he's interested in the things I care about, or if I feel comfortable around him. Brad laughed, not unkindly but with the sort of indulgence you might show a child who had just announced they wanted to be a princess when they grew up. Eunice, you're not in a position to be that picky. I mean, no offense, but you're 26. You live with your mom, and you work part-time jobs. Most guys your age are looking for someone who has her life together. The words hit like a slap, all the more painful because they were delivered so casually, like they were stating an obvious fact rather than making a cruel judgment. Carmen nodded along, clearly thinking Brad had made an excellent point. That's exactly what I've been trying to tell her, she said. She needs to be realistic about what she brings to the table. I looked between them, these two people who supposedly cared about me, who were supposedly trying to help me find happiness, but all I could see was their absolute certainty that I was fundamentally inadequate, that any man who showed interest in me was either settling or lying. Maybe I bring more to the table than you think, I said quietly. Carmen's expression softened into the kind of pity that was somehow worse than outright cruelty. Oh honey, I know you're smart and sweet, and you'll make someone a good wife someday, but you have to understand that men have options. They don't have to choose someone who's still figuring out her life when they could choose someone who already has everything together. The conversation continued for another hour, with Carmen and Brad taking turns explaining why I should lower my expectations and accept Gregory's invitation for lunch. They meant well, I told myself. They were trying to protect me from disappointment, trying to help me find happiness within the constraints of what they believed I deserved. But as I finally escaped to my room and closed the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that their version of protection felt an awful lot like a prison. They had looked at me and seen someone who needed to settle, someone who couldn't afford to want what she actually wanted. Marcus had looked at me and seen potential. I knew which perspective I wanted to believe, but after years of absorbing my family's judgments about my limitations, it was hard to trust my own instincts. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was being foolishly romantic to think that someone like Marcus could genuinely be interested in someone like me. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I looked down to see Marcus's name on the screen. Thank you for coffee today. I had a really wonderful time getting to know you. Would you like to have dinner Friday night? I know a great little Italian place that I think you'd love. I stared at the message for a long time, hearing Carmen's voice in my head warning me about men who used flattery to get close to me, hearing Brad's casual assessment of my limited romantic value. But then I thought about the way Marcus had listened when I talked about my work, the way he had asked what I thought instead of telling me what I should think. I typed back, I'd love to have dinner Friday night, and for the first time in years I didn't second-guess myself. Friday evening arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. I had spent an embarrassing amount of time getting ready for my dinner with Marcus, trying on 3 different outfits before settling on a burgundy dress that had been hanging in my closet unworn for months. It was slightly more formal than my usual attire, with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt that made me feel elegant in a way I rarely allowed myself to experience. I was putting the finishing touches on my makeup when Carmen appeared in my doorway without knocking, a habit that had irritated me since childhood but which I had never successfully managed to break her up. She leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed, studying my appearance with the critical eye of someone conducting an inspection. "You're really going through with this dinner thing," she said, and it wasn't a question. "Yes, I am," I replied, applying a final coat of mascara without meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Have you thought about what you're going to talk about?" I mean really thought about, because sitting in a library discussing urban planning is very different from trying to hold a conversation over a romantic dinner. I turned to face her, bristling at the implication that I was somehow incapable of normal social interaction. "I think I can manage to have a conversation, Carmen." She shrugged, her expression skeptical. "I'm just saying, don't get your hopes up too high. Men like that don't usually stick around once they realize what your actual situation is. He probably thinks you're some kind of graduate student or research professional, not someone who lives at home and does odd jobs for professors." Her words landed like poisoned darts, each one designed to find the soft spots in my confidence. I had been feeling beautiful and hopeful, but Carmen's casual cruelty had a way of deflating those feelings almost instantly. "Why do you do this?" I asked quietly. "Do what?" "Try to make me feel bad about myself every time something good happens to me." Carmen's expression shifted to one of hurt surprise, as if I had accused her of something completely unreasonable. "I'm not trying to make you feel bad, Eunice. I'm trying to protect you from getting hurt. There's a difference. Because it feels like you're more invested in proving that I'm not good enough than in supporting me." "That's not fair," Carmen said, her voice rising slightly. "I've been trying to help you for years. I've given you advice. I've tried to set you up with nice men. I've offered to help you with your career, but you reject everything I suggest, and then act like I'm the bad guy for trying to look out for you." I stared at her, trying to find the words to explain what she didn't seem to understand. "Your version of help always requires me to become someone else. You want me to change my job, my appearance, my interests, my standards. You never ask what would make me happy, you just decide what would make me acceptable." Carmen was quiet for a moment, and I thought maybe I had finally gotten through to her, but when she spoke again, her voice was tired and exasperated. "Eunice, I love you, but you live in a fantasy world. You think you can just be yourself and everything will work out perfectly, but that's not how life works. Sometimes you have to compromise, sometimes you have to adapt. I'm not asking you to become someone else. I'm asking you to become the best version of yourself." "And what if I think I already am the best version of myself?" The look Carmen gave me was equal parts pity and frustration. "Then you're not being honest with yourself." She left without another word, and I sat on the edge of my bed for several minutes, trying to reclaim the confidence she had so efficiently dismantled. By the time I gathered my purse and headed for the door, I felt uncertain and self-conscious in a way that I hadn't when I started getting ready. The restaurant Marcus had chosen was exactly the kind of place I loved, small and intimate, with warm lighting and the smell of garlic and fresh herbs in the air. He was already seated at a corner table when I arrived, and when he looked up and smiled, some of my earlier confidence began to return. He stood to greet me, and for a moment I was struck again by how genuinely happy he seemed to seem. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the way he said it made me believe it might actually be true. We ordered wine and settled into conversation as easily as we had during our coffee date. Marcus had a gift for asking questions that drew out stories I had never told anyone, and I found myself talking about my childhood love of books, my grandmother who had taught me to sew, my dream of maybe someday writing a novel about the historical figures I researched. "You should do it," Marcus said when I mentioned the novel idea. "I'd love to read something that brought historical research to life in a narrative way. Most history books are so dry, but you have this way of talking about people from the past like they're real individuals with complex motivations." "You really think so?" I asked, surprised by how much his encouragement meant to me.
Absolutely, you have a natural storytelling ability. The way you described that city planner from the 1940s the other day, I felt like I knew him personally by the time you finished talking about his work. We were halfway through our main course when Marcus's phone buzzed against the table. He glanced at it and frowned slightly. I'm sorry, I should probably take this. It's about a property deal that's been in negotiation for weeks. He stepped outside to take the call, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the warm glow of wine and good conversation. I was feeling more relaxed and happy than I had in months, finally allowing myself to believe that maybe Carmen was wrong about me, maybe I was worth wanting exactly as I was. That's when I heard the voice from the table behind me, clear and carrying despite the restaurant's ambient noise. Oh my God, is that Eunice Powell? I turned slightly, and saw two women from my high school, Jennifer Walsh and Stephanie Chen, seated at a table with two men I didn't recognize. Jennifer had been homecoming queen senior year, and Stephanie had been student body president. They had never been cruel to me in school, but they had never really noticed me either. I was surprised they even remembered my name. It is, Stephanie exclaimed, loud enough that several other diners turned to look. Eunice, how are you? I smiled and waved, hoping they would leave it at that, but Jennifer was already standing up and making her way over to my table. Stephanie followed, both of them carrying their wine glasses and wearing the bright, slightly tipsy smiles of people who had been enjoying their evening. We were just talking about people from high school, Jennifer said, sliding into Marcus's empty chair without invitation. I can't believe you're here. How have you been? What are you up to these days? I'm doing research work, I said carefully, acutely aware that my answer would be measured against whatever impressive careers they had built for themselves.
Research?
That sounds so intellectual, Stephanie said, perching on the edge of the table. Are you in graduate school? No, I'm freelancing, working with professors on various projects. Oh, that's nice, Jennifer said, and I could hear the slight shift in her tone as she processed what freelancing probably meant in terms of income and stability. Are you still living in Riverside High? The question was innocent enough, but the way she asked it suggested she already knew the answer. Riverside Heights wasn't exactly the kind of neighborhood that people moved to when they were doing well for themselves. Yes, I'm still there, I said, wondering where Marcus was and how long phone calls about property deals typically lasted. With your mom, right? Stephanie added. I think I heard that from someone. That's so sweet that you're taking care of her. I wasn't taking care of my mother. I was living with her because I couldn't afford my own place, but I didn't correct the mischaracterization. Family is important, I said simply. Absolutely, Jennifer agreed. So are you here by yourself tonight? She let the question hang in the air, and I realized she was asking whether I was on a date or eating alone. The latter seemed more likely to her, judging by her expression. I'm having dinner with someone,
He stepped out to take a phone call. Ooh, a date. Stephanie clapped her hands together like I had just announced an engagement. How exciting. What does he do? He works in community development. That's wonderful, Jennifer said with the kind of enthusiasm people used when they were trying to be polite about something unimpressive. It's so important to date someone who shares your values about helping people. The conversation continued in this vein for several more minutes, with Jennifer and Stephanie asking increasingly pointed questions about my life while sharing updates about their own successful careers and recent purchases of expensive homes. They weren't being intentionally cruel, but their surprise at finding me on an actual date was palpable, and their assumptions about my circumstances were becoming more obvious with each exchange. You know, Jennifer said finally, you should really think about getting back into the dating scene more seriously. I mean, you're still young enough to find someone good, but you don't want to wait too long. The pool of available men gets smaller every year after 30. And pickier, Stephanie added helpfully. I mean, men in their 30s are usually looking for someone who's really established in her career, someone who can be a true partner, but I'm sure you'll find someone who appreciates your unique quality. By the time Marcus returned to the table, Jennifer and Stephanie had extracted promises that I would look them up on social media and had shared detailed accounts of their own romantic successes. They greeted Marcus with bright smiles and obvious curiosity, immediately launching into questions about his work and background. Marcus handled their interrogation with grace, but I could see him taking note of their assumptions about me, their barely concealed surprise that I was on a date with someone who seemed successful and articulate. When they finally returned to their own table, I felt deflated in a way that was becoming all too familiar. "Friends from high school?" Marcus asked as he settled back into his chair. "Acquaintances," I corrected. "We weren't really close. They seemed interested in your personal life." I laughed, but it came out bitter. "They were surprised to see me on a date. It's not exactly a common occurrence for me." Marcus studied my face for a moment. "Do you want to talk about what just happened?" "Not really," I said, then immediately felt guilty for shutting him down. "I'm sorry. It's just that running into people from high school always makes me feel like I'm being evaluated and found wanting." "By what standard?" The question was so simple, but it stopped me cold. By what standard was I being found wanting? Jennifer and Stephanie had successful careers and nice homes, but did that make them better people? Did it make them happier? Did it make their lives more meaningful? "I don't know," I admitted. "The usual ones, I guess. Career success, financial stability, relationship status." "And how do you measure success?" Marcus asked gently. I thought about it for a moment. I used to think it was about being useful, about contributing something meaningful to the world. But lately I've been wondering if that's just something people say when they can't achieve conventional success. Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. "Eunice, do you know what I do for work? I mean specifically." I shook my head, realizing that our conversations had been more about general concepts than concrete details. "I develop affordable housing projects. I spend my days in meetings with city planners and bank loan officers and community groups, trying to convince people that everyone deserves a safe, decent place to live. Most of the time I feel like I'm fighting an uphill battle against people who only care about profit margins and property values." He paused, taking a sip of wine before continuing. "Yesterday, when I was talking to you about the research you do, about the way you see connections between policy and people's actual lives, I realized something. You understand the human impact of urban development in a way that most of the professionals I work with don't. You see the big picture and the individual stories at the same time." I felt heat rise in my cheeks. "I don't think let me finish," Marcus said gently. "The work you do matters, Eunice. The research you contribute to influences policy decisions that affect real people's lives. The fact that you're passionate about it, that you care about getting it right, that you're willing to dig deep and ask questions. That's not conventional success, but it's something much more important." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "You really believe—" "I know it," he said firmly. "And I think the reason those women seemed surprised to see you on a date isn't because there's something wrong with you. It's because they've never looked closely enough to see who you really are." The rest of dinner passed in a blur of warmth and connection. Marcus walked me to my car afterwards, and when he kissed me goodnight, soft and sweet, and full of promise, I felt like I was floating. For a few hours I had allowed myself to see my life through his eyes instead of my family's, and the view was surprisingly beautiful. But that euphoria didn't survive the drive home. I walked through the front door of our apartment to find Carmen, Mom, and Brad all sitting in the living room, clearly waiting for me. The sight of them arranged like an intervention committee made my stomach drop. "How was your day?" Mom asked, but her tone suggested she wasn't looking for a detailed recap. "It was lovely," I said carefully, setting my purse down on the side table. "Good," Carmen said, though she didn't look like she thought it was good at all, "because we need to talk to you about something important." I remained standing, unwilling to settle in for what was obviously going to be an unpleasant conversation. "What about?" Brad cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable but determined to play his part. "Well, the thing is, Eunice, Carmen and I have been doing some research into this Marcus guy, and we've found some things that are concerning." My blood went cold. "What kind of research?" "Social media, professional networks, public records," Carmen said matter-of-factly. "It's not stalking, it's due diligence. And what we found is that this guy is way out of your league." "What does that mean?" Carmen pulled out her phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be screenshots. "Marcus Chen, 32 years old, graduated from Northwestern with a degree in urban planning, MBA from University of Chicago. He's the principal development officer for Meridian Properties, which is one of the biggest commercial real estate companies in the state. She looked up at me expectantly, as if this information should mean something significant. And, I prompted, and he makes more money in a year than you've probably made in your entire adult life, Brad said bluntly. He owns a downtown condo worth over $500,000. He travels internationally for work. He moves in circles with city council members and bank presidents. So what is someone like that doing asking out someone like you? Carmen demanded. It doesn't make sense. Men like Marcus Chen don't date women who live at home and work part-time jobs. There has to be something else going on. Mom leaned forward, her expression worried. We're concerned that he might not be entirely honest about his intentions, sweetheart. Sometimes men will pursue women they see as less experienced, for reasons that aren't serious. The implication hit me like a physical blow. They thought Marcus was only interested in me for sex, that the only reason a successful man would spend time with someone like me was if he was looking for an easy conquest. That's ridiculous, I said, but even as I spoke the words I could feel doubt creeping in around the edges. Marcus was successful and accomplished and incredibly attractive. What was he doing with someone like me? Is it ridiculous? Carmen challenged. Really think about it, What do you have in common with someone who owns expensive real estate and travels to Europe for business? What could you possibly offer someone like that in terms of a real relationship? Maybe he likes me for who I am, I said weakly. Carmen's expression softened into pity. Oh hun, I'm sure he does like you. You're sweet and naive and probably exactly what he's looking for in a casual fling. But men like Marcus Chen don't marry women like you. They marry women who can match their lifestyle, women who can be assets to their careers. Women like, I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. Women like me, Carmen said without a trace of modesty. Successful, polished, women who understand how to navigate professional social situations, who know how to dress for important events, who can hold their own in conversations with other successful people. The room was quiet for a moment as her words sank. Then Brad, clearly trying to be helpful, added his own perspective. Look, Eunice, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with you as a person, but you have to understand that when people reach a certain level of success, they start thinking strategically about relationships. They need partners who can enhance their lives, not complicate them. And I would complicate his life. Well, think about it, Mom said gently. If he brought you to a work function, what would you talk about with his colleague? If he wanted to take you on a business trip, could you afford appropriate clothing? If he got promoted and had to entertain clients, would you know how to hostess a dinner party? Each question felt like a small death, highlighting yet another way I would be inadequate as the partner of a successful man. I thought about Marcus's elegant confidence, his easy way of talking about complex professional issues, his expensive watch, and perfectly tailored clothes. What had I been thinking? That someone like that would genuinely want to build a life with someone like me. I just don't want you to get hurt, Carmen said. And for the first time that evening, she sounded genuinely concerned rather than superior. I've seen what happens when women get involved with men who are way out of their league. It never ends well. What do you think I should do? I asked quietly. End it now, before you get too attached, Carmen said firmly. Tell him you enjoyed getting to know him, but you're looking for something different. Keep your dignity intact. Or, Brad suggested, you could just enjoy it for what it is. Have some fun. Get some experience, but don't expect it to turn into anything serious. The idea of Marcus as a casual fling, someone who was just amusing himself with me before moving on to someone more appropriate, made me feel sick to my stomach. But as I looked around the room at the three people who supposedly knew me best, I couldn't deny the logic of their argument. What did I have to offer someone like Marcus Chen? What future could there possibly be for us? I went to bed that night feeling more confused and insecure than I had in years. My family had effectively dismantled every good feeling from my evening with Marcus, replacing them with doubt and self-consciousness. But as I lay in the dark staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about the way Marcus had looked at me when he talked about my work, the genuine interest in his voice when he asked about my ideas. Was that all an act? Was he really just looking for a casual distraction from his important, successful life? I fell asleep clutching my phone, half hoping Marcus would text me something that would prove my family wrong, and half dreading any communication that might confirm their suspicion. The next morning brought no clarity, only a text from Marcus thanking me for a wonderful evening and asking if I'd like to go hiking with him the following weekend. I stared at the message for a long time, trying to read between the lines for evidence of his true intention. Carmen found me in the kitchen still holding my phone an hour later. "Let me guess," she said, glancing at the screen. "Prince Charming wants to see you again." I nodded, unable to trust my voice. "What are you going to tell him?" "I don't know." Carmen sat down across from me, her expression uncharacteristically gentle. "Eunice, I know you think I'm being cruel, but I really am trying to protect you. I've watched you get your hopes up before, and I've seen how devastated you get when things don't work out. This time feels different because the fall is going to be so much farther." "Maybe it won't fall," I said quietly. "And maybe it will," Carmen replied. "Are you prepared for that? Are you prepared to have your heart broken by someone who was probably never serious about you in the first place?" I looked at my sister, this woman who had spent our entire adult relationship pointing out my limitations and managing my expectations. She genuinely believed she was helping me by teaching me to want less, to accept less, to be less. But what if she was wrong? What if Marcus really did see something in me that she couldn't see? What if I was worth more than my family had taught me to believe? "I'm going to say yes to the hiking trip," I said suddenly. Carmen's expression hardened. "Even after everything we talked about last night?" "Especially after everything we talked about last night." "Why?" I thought about it for a moment, trying to find the words for something I was only beginning to understand myself. "Because I'm tired of letting other people decide what I deserve. Because maybe, just maybe, you're all wrong about me." Carmen stared at me for a long moment, then shook her head sadly. "I hope you know what you're doing, Eunice. I really do. Because when this blows up in your face, and it will, don't expect me to pick up the pieces." She left me alone in the kitchen with my phone and my doubts, and my small, stubborn flame of hope. I typed back to Marcus before I could lose my nerve. "I'd love to go hiking with you." His response came back almost immediately. "Perfect. I know just the place. Can't wait to spend the day with you." As I read his message, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to stop letting my family's fears define my possibilities. I was going to stop accepting their version of who I was, and what I deserved. I was going to find out for myself what Marcus Chen saw when he looked at me, even if it meant risking the kind of heartbreak Carmen was so sure was coming. Because for the first time in my adult life, I was beginning to suspect that the biggest risk wasn't in reaching too high, it was in never reaching at all. The hiking trail Marcus had chosen wound through a state park about 40 minutes outside the city, a place I had never been despite living in the area my entire life. As I followed his car along the winding road that led to the trailhead, I felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement that had nothing to do with physical exertion. This felt like stepping into a completely different world, one where I might discover parts of myself that had been dormant for years. Marcus was waiting for me by his car when I pulled into the gravel parking lot, already changed into hiking boots and a lightweight jacket. He smiled when he saw me, that same warm expression that made me feel like the most important person in his field of vision. "Ready for an adventure?" he asked, shouldering a small backpack that looked professional and well used. "As ready as someone can be who hasn't hiked anywhere more challenging than the campus quad," I admitted. "Perfect. This trail is designed for people exactly like that." We started up the path together, Marcus adjusting his pace to match mine without making me feel like I was holding him back. The morning air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. For the first mile we talked easily about the changing leaves and the wildlife we spotted, but gradually our conversation deepened into territory I hadn't expected. "Tell me about your research process," Marcus said, as we paused at a scenic overlook. "When you're working on a project,
How do you decide which sources to pursue? The question surprised me with its specificity. Most people, when they asked about my work at all, wanted general information that they could politely acknowledge before changing the subject. But Marcus seemed genuinely interested in the mechanics of what I did. It depends on what I'm trying to prove or disprove, I said, settling onto a fallen log that served as a natural bench. Dr. Harrison's current project is about housing policy impacts, so I start with the official records, city council minutes, zoning decisions, demographic data. But then I dig deeper, looking for the stories those numbers don't tell. What kind of stories? Well, for instance, the data might show that a neighborhood's median income increased by 30% over a decade, which sounds like success. But when you read local newspaper archives and interview longtime residents, you might discover that the increase came because lower-income families were displaced, not because existing residents became more prosperous. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. So you're looking for the human reality behind the statistics. Exactly. Numbers can be manipulated to support almost any narrative, but individual stories are harder to twist. That's exactly the kind of insight I wish more developers and city planners understood. Marcus, most of them see communities as abstract problems to be solved rather than collections of real people with complex needs. We resumed walking, and I found myself talking more freely than I had with anyone in months. Marcus asked follow-up questions that showed he was really listening, that he understood the nuances of what I was describing. When I mentioned a particularly challenging research puzzle I had solved the previous month, he stopped walking entirely and turned to face me. That's brilliant, he said simply. You found a pattern that 3 different scholars had missed. That's not just good research, that's innovative thinking. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. It was mostly just persistence. No, it wasn't. Persistence is important, but what you're describing requires analytical skills that can't be taught. You have a gift for seeing connections that other people miss. The praise made me uncomfortable in a way I was only beginning to understand. I had spent so many years accepting my family's assessment of my limitations that genuine recognition felt almost foreign. You're being very generous. I'm being honest, Marcus said firmly, and I think maybe you're not used to people recognizing what you're capable of. The observation hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. My family thinks I'm wasting my potential doing freelance research instead of getting a real job. What do they think you should be doing instead? I laughed, but it came out something with health insurance and a retirement plan. Carmen thinks I should work for a corporation somewhere, doing marketing or administrative support, something stable and respectable. And what do you think? The question was becoming familiar. This gentle insistence that my own opinion mattered. I think I love what I do, even if it doesn't fit anyone else's definition of success, but sometimes I wonder if they're right, if I'm just being impractical. Marcus was quiet for a moment as we navigated a particularly rocky section of trail. Can I tell you something about my job? I nodded. Most people, when they hear that I work in commercial real estate development, assume it's all about making money, and don't get me wrong, it is a business. But the projects I choose to work on, the developments I help create, they have the potential to shape communities for generations. Every decision about where to put affordable housing, how to design public spaces, whether to preserve existing architecture, those choices affect real people's daily lives. He paused to help me over a fallen tree, his hand warm and steady as it gripped mine. The research you do, the patterns you identify, the connections you make between policy and outcome, that work influences the scholarship that influences the decisions that shape those communities. You're part of a chain that connects academic understanding to real-world impact. That's not impractical, Eunice. That's essential. I stared at him, trying to process this perspective on my work that I had never considered before. You really see it that way? I know it that way. Dr. Harrison's research has been cited in 3 different city planning proposals in the past year. Policymakers are reading the work you help create and using it to make better decisions. How is that not valuable? We reached the summit of the trail as the sun reached its zenith, and the view from the top took my breath away. The city sprawled below us, a patchwork of neighborhoods and parks and river that looked almost magical from this height. Marcus pointed out landmarks and developments, explaining the history and politics behind various projects with the passion of someone who genuinely cared about urban planning as both an art and a science. That complex there, he said, indicating a cluster of modern buildings near the river, that's one of mine, mixed-income housing with ground-floor retail space and a community center. It took 3 years to get approved because everyone was worried about changing the character of the neighborhood, but it's been hugely successful. What made it work when other developments fail? Community input from the very beginning, Marcus said immediately. Instead of designing something and then trying to sell it to residents, we held dozens of meetings asking people what they needed, what they valued about their neighborhood, what they were afraid of losing. The final design incorporated those concerns. That's exactly what Harrison's research advocates for, I said excitedly. Community-driven development, instead of top-down planning, which is why I was so excited to meet you, Marcus said, turning to look at me directly.
You understand these issues at a level that most people don't. You see the big picture and the individual impact simultaneously. We ate lunch sitting on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley, sharing sandwiches and trail mix, while Marcus told me about his vision for sustainable urban development. His passion was infectious, and I found myself contributing ideas and observations that seemed to genuinely interest him. For the first time in years, I felt intellectually stimulated in a way that went beyond the solitary satisfaction of research. Have you ever thought about pursuing a master's degree in urban planning? Marcus asked as we packed up our lunch remains. The question caught me off guard, not seriously. I mean, I've thought about graduate school in general, but I never considered that I was qualified for a competitive program. Why not? You have exactly the kind of background programs are looking for: research experience, analytical skills, and genuine passion for the field. Plus, you'd have Dr. Harrison as a reference, and his recommendation carries a lot of weight in academic circles. I was quiet for a moment, trying to imagine myself in graduate school, sitting in seminars and writing papers, and working toward a degree that might actually lead somewhere meaningful. It felt simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. I don't know if I could afford it, I said finally. There are assistantships, grants, funding opportunities. If you're serious about it, I could introduce you to some people who might be able to help you navigate the application process. The offer was so generous, so far beyond what I had expected from our hiking date, that I wasn't sure how to respond. You would do that? Of course. Why wouldn't I? It was such a simple question, but it highlighted something I was only beginning to understand about Marcus. He seemed genuinely invested in my success in a way that had nothing to do with what I could do for him. He asked about my work because he found it interesting, not because he was being polite. He offered to help with my career because he thought I had potential, not because he expected something in return. It was so different from my family's approach to my life that I almost didn't know how to process it. The hike back down was easier than the climb up, and we fell into a comfortable rhythm that allowed for both conversation and peaceful silence. Marcus pointed out plants and geological formations with the knowledge of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors, and I found myself storing away details to research later. Another habit from my academic work that he seemed to find charming rather than nerdy. Thank you for today, I said as we reached the parking lot. I haven't done anything like this in years. We should make it a regular thing, Marcus said. There are dozens of trails within driving distance, and I'd love to explore them with someone who appreciates both the natural beauty and the human geography. The suggestion that this might become a pattern, that Marcus saw a future in which we continued spending time together, sent a warm flutter through my chest. I'd really like that. He walked me to my car, and when he kissed me goodbye, it was deeper and more lingering than our first kiss had been. There was something different about it, a sense of growing intimacy that made my pulse quicken. I'll call you tomorrow, he said against my lip. I want to hear how the rest of your weekend goes. I drove home in a haze of happiness, replaying moments from our hike and marveling at how different I felt when I was with Marcus. He didn't just listen to me, he heard me. He didn't just tolerate my interests, he shared them. He didn't just accept my personality, he seemed to genuinely enjoy it. But that euphoria began to fade as I pulled into the parking lot of our apartment complex. Through the window of our unit, I could see the silhouettes of Carmen and Mom sitting at the kitchen table, and I knew they would be waiting to dissect my day with Marcus and remind me of all the reasons I shouldn't get too attached. I sat in my car for several minutes, trying to hold on to the confidence Marcus had given me before finally gathering the courage to go inside. "How was your nature walk?" Carmen asked the moment I walked through the door, her tone suggesting that hiking was a quaint activity that serious adults didn't really pursue. "It was wonderful," I said, determined not to let her diminish the experience. "The trail was beautiful, and Marcus is incredibly knowledgeable about urban planning and environmental policy." "Urban planning," Mom repeated with the slight confusion of someone trying to understand why anyone would find such a topic interesting. "That's nice, dear. Did you learn anything useful?" The question revealed so much about how my family viewed my interests. They couldn't imagine that I might have contributed anything meaningful to the conversation, that Marcus might have been learning from me as much as I was learning from him. "Actually, Marcus thinks I should consider applying to graduate school," I said, watching their expressions carefully. Carmen and Mom exchanged a look that I had seen many times before, the look of adults indulging a child's impossible dream. "Graduate school is very expensive, sweetheart," Mom said gently, "and very competitive. You'd be competing against people who have been preparing for years. Plus, what would you do with a graduate degree in urban planning?" Carmen added. "It's not like there are a lot of job opportunities in that field around here." "Marcus seems to have found plenty of opportunities," I pointed out. "Marcus went to Northwestern and University of Chicago," Carmen said with the patience of someone explaining something obvious. "He has connections and resources that you don't have. He can afford to take risks that you can't." The familiar pattern was beginning again, my family's systematic dismantling of any ambition that didn't fit their narrow definition of what was realistic for someone like me. But this time I found myself pushing back in a way I never had before. "Maybe I'm capable of more than you think I am," I said quietly. Carmen's expression softened into pity. "Eunice, I'm not trying to be mean. I just don't want you to get carried away by someone who's filling your head with unrealistic ideas. Marcus probably means well, but he doesn't understand your actual situation. You're 26 years old with no advanced degree, no significant savings, and no established career path," Carmen said bluntly. "You live at home and work part-time jobs. Those are just facts, not judgment." "But they don't have to be permanent facts," I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "Of course not," Mom said quickly, "but graduate school isn't the answer. You need something more practical, more immediate." Carmen has been looking into some openings at her company, administrative positions that come with good benefits and opportunities for advancement. The suggestion felt like a trap closing around me. I could see my future stretching out in a series of compromises and lowered expectations, each decision designed to make me more acceptable to others, rather than more true to myself. "I appreciate the thought," I said carefully, "but I'd like to explore the graduate school option first." Carmen's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Eunice. You're letting some guy you barely know convince you to pursue fantasies instead of facing reality. Maybe my reality is bigger than you think it is." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Carmen and Mom taking turns explaining why graduate school was impractical and why I should focus on more achievable goals. But for the first time in my adult life, their arguments didn't land with their usual force. Marcus had shown me a different perspective on my abilities and potential, and that perspective was proving surprisingly resilient against my family's skepticism. That night, I lay in bed, researching urban planning graduate programs on my laptop. The application requirements were intimidating. GRE scores, personal statements, letters of recommendation, portfolios of relevant work, but not impossible. Dr. Harrison would almost certainly provide a reference, and my research experience, while unconventional, was extensive and varied. The more I read, the more excited I became about the possibility. These programs were designed for people who wanted to shape the built environment, who cared about how communities developed and evolved. They were looking for students with analytical skills and passionate commitment to public policy, qualities that Marcus had helped me recognize in myself. I was deep in exploring funding opportunities when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "I hope you had as wonderful a day as I did. I keep thinking about our conversation regarding graduate school. I have a friend who graduated from the urban planning program at State University, Would you like me to connect you two for an informational interview? I stared at the message for a long time, touched by his continued investment in my potential future. That would be amazing. Thank you for thinking of me. I'm always thinking of you, came his immediate response, followed by a heart emoji that made me smile despite myself. Over the next few weeks, Marcus and I fell into a routine that felt both exciting and natural. We had dinner twice a week, always at restaurants I had never been to before, places where Marcus seemed comfortable and welcome. He introduced me to cuisines I had never tried, and wines I couldn't have afforded on my own, but he did it in a way that felt like sharing rather than showing off. More importantly, he continued to treat my work and interests as valuable and worth discussing. When I mentioned a particularly challenging research problem I was working on, he would follow up days later to ask how it was progressing. When I shared an insight from Dr. Harrison's latest project, he would connect it to developments he was working on and ask for my perspective on potential challenges. It was intoxicating to be with someone who not only listened to my ideas, but built on them, who treated me like an intellectual equal rather than someone whose thoughts were charming but ultimately inconsequential. I began to see myself through his eyes, as someone capable and insightful, someone whose contributions mattered. The informational interview Marcus arranged went better than I had dared to hope. His friend Sarah Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, was a recent graduate of the State University's urban planning program, who now worked for a nonprofit focused on affordable housing advocacy. She was enthusiastic about her experiences and remarkably encouraging about my prospects. "Your research background is actually a huge advantage," she told me over coffee at a downtown cafe Marcus had recommended. "Most people come into the program with undergraduate degrees in political science or economics, but they don't have hands-on experience with the kind of in-depth analysis you've been doing." Really? I was worried that my path was too unconventional. Unconventional can be good, especially if you can articulate how your experiences have prepared you for graduate-level work. "From what Marcus told me about your research with Dr. Harrison, you're already doing the kind of policy analysis that we spent 2 years learning how to do." Sarah spent an hour walking me through the application process, recommending specific programs and professors whose work aligned with my interests. She even offered to review my personal statement once I had drafted it, an offer of mentorship that felt almost too generous to accept. "Why are you being so helpful to a complete stranger?" I asked as we prepared to leave. Sarah smiled. "Because Marcus asked me to, and Marcus has excellent judgment about people, but also because I remember how intimidating this whole process felt when I was starting out. Having someone who believes in your potential makes all the difference." I walked back to my car feeling more hopeful about my future than I had in years. Graduate school was beginning to feel not just possible but inevitable, a natural next step for someone with my skills and interests. For the first time since college, I had a clear vision of where I wanted my life to go, but that vision required resources I didn't have, and support I wasn't sure I could count on. Application fees, test prep materials, potential graduate school tuition, the financial requirements alone were daunting for someone with my limited income, and I knew my family would see every dollar spent on graduate school applications as money wasted on impossible dreams. Marcus must have sensed my anxiety, because he brought up the subject during our next dinner date. "How are you feeling about the graduate school research?" he asked as we shared an appetizer at an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. "Excited but overwhelmed," I admit. "The programs look amazing, but the practical aspects are intimidating. Application fees, GRE prep, all of it adds up quickly." "Those are solvable problems," Marcus said matter-of-fact. "There are fee waivers for people with financial need, free test prep resources online, libraries full of study materials. The barriers aren't as insurmountable as they might seem." "It's not just the money," I said, though money was certainly part of it. "It's more that I'm not sure I believe I can actually do this. What if I apply and don't get in anywhere? What if I'm not as capable as you think I am?" Marcus set down his fork and looked at me seriously. "Eunice, do you know what I do when I'm evaluating a potential development project?" I shook my head. "I look at the fundamentals: location, market conditions, community need,
financial projections. I ignore the emotional noise and focus on the objective indicators of success, and when I look at your fundamentals as a graduate school candidate, everything points to success. He began counting on his fingers. You have extensive research experience, strong analytical skills, genuine passion for the field, and the ability to work independently. You've already proven you can handle complex projects and produce high-quality work. You have Harrison's support, which means you'll have excellent recommendations. What part of that profile suggests you won't succeed? The question was so logical, so practical, that it cut through all the emotional static my family had created around my ability. When you put it like that, it sounds almost reasonable. It is reasonable, more than reasonable. It's smart. You're not taking a wild risk, Eunice. You're making a strategic investment in a future that builds on your existing strength. The conversation stayed with me for days, gradually reshaping how I thought about my potential and my options. Marcus had a way of making possibilities seem not just achievable but obvious, as if the only reason I hadn't pursued them before was because no one had explained them clearly enough. I began dedicating an hour each evening to graduate school preparation, researching programs and drafting personal statement outlines. I checked out GRE study guides from the library and started working through practice problems. I even created a detailed budget, showing how I might afford application fees and testing costs, identifying small sacrifices that could free up the necessary funds. But I kept all of this preparation secret from my family. I wasn't ready for Carmen's skepticism or Mom's worried questions about the practicality of my plans. I needed time to build my confidence before subjecting it to their well-meaning but destructive doubt. The secrecy felt strange but also liberating. For the first time in years, I was working towards something that belonged entirely to me, something that my family couldn't dismiss or diminish because they didn't know it existed. The private nature of my efforts made them feel more precious, more significant. Marcus became my co-conspirator without realizing it, the only person who knew about my growing commitment to graduate school and who consistently encouraged my progress. When I mentioned that I had outlined my personal statement, he offered to read a draft. When I worried about asking Dr. Harrison for a recommendation letter, he reminded me that professors typically considered such requests an honor rather than an imposition. "You're not asking for a favor," he told me during one of our evening walks through downtown. "You're giving him an opportunity to support the career development of someone whose work he values. That's what good mentors want to do." The downtown walks had become another regular part of our relationship. Evening strolls through the city center that allowed Marcus to point out various development projects and explain the political and economic forces that had shaped them. I loved these expeditions, partly because they fed my growing interest in urban planning, but mostly because they demonstrated how seamlessly our intellectual interests align. "That building there," Marcus said one evening, indicating a sleek office tower near the river, "that's where Carmen works, right?" I looked up at the gleaming structure, surprised by the mention of my sister. "How did you know that?" "You mentioned her company name once, and I know they lease space there. It's actually one of the most expensive commercial addresses in the city." I studied the building with new eyes, trying to imagine Carmen in her corner office, conducting the important business that she was always too busy to discuss in detail. "It looks impressive." It is. The companies that can afford space there are typically very successful, very established. "Your sister must be quite accomplished in her field." There was no judgment in his voice, just matter-of-fact recognition of Carmen's professional achievement. But somehow his acknowledgement of her success made me feel smaller rather than proud, highlighting once again the gap between her life and mine. "She is," I said quietly. "She's always been the successful one in our family." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face me. "Eunice, success isn't a finite resource. Your sister's achievements don't diminish your potential for achievement. They exist independently. I know that intellectually, but it's hard to feel it when you've spent your whole life being compared to someone who seems to excel at everything." "What if the comparison is flawed?" Marcus asked gently. "What if you're being measured against the wrong standard?" The question stayed with me as we continued our walk, weaving through tree-lined streets where young professionals were enjoying evening drinks on restaurant patios. I had spent so many years accepting that Carmen's version of success was the only valid version, But what if there were other ways to measure a life well lived? What if my path didn't have to look like hers to be worthwhile? Marcus walked me to my car as he always did, and when he kissed me goodnight, I felt the same electric warmth that had been building between us over the past month. But there was something deeper now, a sense of connection that went beyond physical attraction to encompass shared values and mutual respect. "I have something I want to ask you," he said as we separated, his hands still resting on my waist. "My company is hosting a reception next Friday for some potential investors in a new affordable housing project. It's a pretty important event, and I was wondering if you'd like to come with me." The invitation caught me completely off guard. I had assumed that our relationship existed in a bubble separate from his professional life, that he wouldn't want to introduce someone like me to his colleagues and business associates. "Are you sure?" I asked. "I mean, won't it be all important business people? I don't know if I'd fit in." Marcus smiled, the expression warm and confident. "Eunice, you'll fit in perfectly. You know more about housing policy and community development than most of the people who'll be there, and besides, I want them to meet you." The simple declaration sent a flutter of happiness through my chest. He wanted to introduce me to his professional circle, wanted to include me in an important work event. It suggested a level of seriousness about our relationship that I hadn't dared to hope for. "I'd love to come," I said, then immediately began worrying about the practical detail. What should I wear? What will people expect me to say about myself? "Wear whatever makes you feel confident," Marcus said simply, "and just be yourself. That's all you ever need to be." I drove home that night with my mind racing, equally excited and terrified about the upcoming reception. This felt like a test of some kind, an opportunity to prove that I could be the kind of partner Marcus deserved. But it also felt like a chance to see myself in a new context, to discover whether the confidence he had helped me build could survive in the sophisticated world he inhabited professionally. I was so absorbed in planning what I might wear, and what I might say to Marcus's colleagues, that I almost didn't notice Carmen's car in our parking lot. It was only when I saw her sitting at our kitchen table with her laptop open that I remembered she had mentioned stopping by to work on wedding planning details with Mom. "There you are," she said as I walked through the door. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd moved in with your boyfriend." The comment was casual, but there was an edge to it that made me defensive. "I told Mom I'd be out for dinner that lasted 5 hours. I glanced at the clock and was surprised to realize how late it had got. Time moved differently when I was with Marcus, hours slipping by unnoticed in the warmth of his attention. "We went for a walk afterward," I said simply. Carmen studied my expression with the scrutiny of someone conducting an investigation. "You look different, happier I guess, more confident." She didn't sound entirely pleased by this observation. "Is that a bad thing?" "It depends on what's causing it," Carmen said carefully. "I just hope you're being realistic about where this relationship is going." I thought about Marcus's invitation to the company reception, about his continued encouragement regarding graduate school, about the way he had started including me in his plans as if my presence was a given, rather than a bonus. "Maybe it's going somewhere good," I said quietly. Carmen closed her laptop and gave me her full attention. "Eunice, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me. Men like Marcus don't end up with women like us. They date us, they enjoy our company, they might even care about us, but when it comes time to get serious, they choose women who match their social and economic status. Women like who? Women with advanced degrees and high-powered careers. Women who went to the right schools and know the right people. Women who can be assets to their professional ambition." The casual cruelty of her assessment took my breath away. "You don't even know Marcus. How can you be so sure about what he wants?" "Because I know men," Carmen said with the certainty of someone who had never been wrong about anything important. "And I know how the world works. I'm trying to protect you from getting hurt when reality sets in." But as I looked at my sister, this woman who had always been so certain about my limitations, I realized something that changed everything. Carmen wasn't protecting me from disappointment. She was protecting herself from the possibility that she might have been wrong about me all along. The company reception was everything I had imagined and nothing like I had feared. The venue was a converted warehouse in the arts district, transformed into an elegant space with exposed brick walls, strategic lighting, and panoramic views of the city skyline. As Marcus and I walked through the entrance together, I felt a flutter of nervousness that had less to do with the sophisticated surroundings and more to do with the significance of being here as his guest. I had chosen my outfit carefully, a navy blue dress I had sewn myself, tailored to fit perfectly and accessorized with my grandmother's pearl earrings. When Marcus saw me that evening, his face had lit up with genuine admiration, and he had told me I looked stunning in a way that made me believe it might actually be true. "Remember," he said quietly as we approached the registration table, "you belong here as much as anyone else. You're brilliant, accomplished, and you have every right to be in this room." His words wrapped around me like armor as we collected our name tags and entered the main reception area. The crowd was a mixture of business professionals, city officials, and community advocates, all gathered to learn about Marcus's latest affordable housing initiative. I recognized some faces from local news coverage, people whose decisions shaped the city's development, but who had always seemed impossibly distant from my own world. Marcus moved through the room with easy confidence, introducing me to colleagues and investors with obvious pride. Each introduction followed the same pattern. "This is Eunice Powell. She's a researcher who specializes in housing policy analysis." He never qualified it, never downplayed my credentials, never suggested that I was anything other than a professional in my own right. The conversations that followed were everything Carmen had insisted I wouldn't be able to handle. City council members asked my opinion on zoning reform, real estate developers sought my perspective on community engagement strategy. A journalist from the Business Journal wanted to know about the research methodologies I used to evaluate policy effectiveness, and to my amazement I held my own. More than that, I thrived. Years of working with Dr. Harrison had given me a deep understanding of these issues, and Marcus's encouragement had taught me to trust my own insights. When a developer questioned the feasibility of truly affordable housing in desirable neighborhoods, I was able to cite specific examples from Dr. Harrison's research where such projects had succeeded. When a city official worried about community resistance to new developments, I could explain the engagement strategies that had proven most effective in similar situations. "You were absolutely right about the Patterson project," said Janet Morrison, a city planner I had heard about but never met. "Your analysis of the demographic impacts was spot on. We've been using your recommendations as a model for our current initiatives." I blinked in surprise. "My analysis, the research you did with Dr.
Harrison on mixed-income housing developments. Your methodology for measuring community integration was exactly what we needed to convince the city council to approve our latest proposal." I felt a rush of pride and disbelief. Work that I had done, patterns I had identified, recommendations I had developed, they were being implemented in real policy decisions. My contributions weren't just academic exercises, they were making a difference in how the city approached development. Marcus appeared at my elbow with a glass of wine and a smile that suggested he had been listening to the conversation. "I told you your work was influencing policy," he said quietly. "Now you've heard it from someone who's actually implementing your ideas." The evening continued in a blur of meaningful conversations and unexpected connections. A nonprofit director invited me to collaborate on a community survey project. A graduate program coordinator from the state university asked if I had ever considered pursuing a master's degree, then handed me her business card when I mentioned I was already researching applications. A consulting firm owner suggested I consider freelancing for private sector clients who needed exactly the kind of policy analysis I specialized in. By the time we left the reception 3 hours later, I felt transformed, not because I had become someone different, but because I had finally seen myself clearly. I wasn't the failed adult Carmen painted me as, struggling to find my place in the world. I was an accomplished professional whose work mattered, whose insights were valued, whose potential was recognized by people who actually understood what I did. "Thank you for tonight," I said as Marcus walked me to my car. I had no idea that my work was having that kind of impact. "I did," Marcus said simply. "That's why I wanted you to meet these people, to hear them acknowledge what you've accomplished. Sometimes we need outside perspective to recognize our own work." He kissed me goodnight with a tenderness that spoke of deepening feelings, and as I drove home through the quiet streets, I felt more confident about my future than I had in years. Graduate school didn't seem like an impossible dream anymore. It seemed like the logical next step for someone with my background and abilities. The consulting opportunities people had mentioned could provide the financial foundation I needed to pursue advanced education. The professional network I had connected with tonight could open doors I hadn't even known existed. I was so absorbed in these possibilities that I almost didn't notice the unusual number of cars in our apartment complex parking lot. It wasn't until I climbed the stairs to our unit that I heard the voices, multiple conversations happening simultaneously, the kind of controlled chaos that suggested a gathering of some kind. I opened the front door to find our small living room packed with people. Carmen was in the center of it all, surrounded by what appeared to be her entire social circle, work colleagues, college friends, Brad's fraternity brothers and their wives. Someone had brought champagne and empty bottles suggested the party had been going on for quite some time. "There she is," Carmen called out when she spotted me in the doorway. Her voice was bright with alcohol and something else I couldn't immediately identify. "Everyone, this is my sister Eunice, the one I was telling you about." The room turned toward me with the kind of collective attention that made me want to disappear. Carmen's friends looked at me with expressions ranging from polite curiosity to barely concealed pity, as if I were some kind of fascinating specimen they had heard about but never seen in person. "We were just celebrating my promotion," Carmen continued, raising a champagne flute in my direction. "Senior Vice President of Marketing, effective immediately. The youngest person in company history to reach that level." A chorus of congratulations erupted from the group, and I managed to smile and add my own praise for Carmen's achievement. She had been working toward this promotion for over a year, and I was genuinely happy for her success. "Tell everyone about your evening," Carmen said, her tone innocent, but her eyes sharp with something that made me wary. "You were at some kind of work function." The room's attention focused on me again, and I felt suddenly self-conscious about my appearance, my late arrival, the obvious fact that I had been somewhere more formal than usual. "Just a reception for one of Marcus's projects," I said carefully. "Marcus is her boyfriend," Carmen explained to the room with the kind of exaggerated enthusiasm that suggested she was setting up a joke. "He works in real estate development. Very successful apparently." Brad, who was clearly several drinks into the celebration, laughed loud. "Real estate development. That's where the money is." "What kind of developments does he work on?" "Affordable housing, mostly," I said, wondering why I felt like I was being interrogated. "Affordable housing," repeated Jessica Walsh, one of Carmen's college sorority sisters. "That's so noble, like helping poor people find places to live." The way she said it, helping poor people, made it sound both admirable and slightly ridiculous, like charity work that was sweet, but not particularly serious or important. "It's more complex than that," I began, thinking about the evening's conversations about zoning reform and community development. "It involves city planning, economic development, policy analysis." "Policy analysis," Carmen interrupted, and something in her tone made the room go quiet. "That's actually perfect, because I have some news that everyone should hear." She set down her champagne glass and pulled out her phone, scrolling through it with the deliberate movements of someone who was tipsy but determined to make a point. "I did a little research into this Marcus Chen that Eunice has been seeing," she announced to the room, "and you'll never guess what I found." My blood went cold. "Carmen, don't. He's not just successful," she continued, ignoring my protest. "He's incredibly successful, like owns half the downtown area." "Successful." She turned her phone toward the room, displaying what appeared to be a business profile with Marcus's photo and professional biography. "Marcus Chen, Principal Development Officer for Meridian Properties," she read aloud. "Graduate of Northwestern University and University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Currently overseeing development projects worth over $200 million. The room was completely silent now, everyone listening with the fascination of people witnessing a dramatic revelation. "But here's the really interesting part," Carmen continued, her voice growing stronger. "Meridian Properties owns 43 commercial and residential buildings in this city, including," she paused for dramatic effect, "the Riverside Heights apartment complex where we live." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at Carmen, trying to process what she had just said. Marcus owned our apartment building. He was my landlord. That's right, Carmen said, clearly enjoying the shocked silence. Our little Eunice has been dating the man who owns our apartment, the man who's been cashing our rent checks every month. The implications crashed over me in waves. Every conversation Marcus and I had shared about my living situation, every moment I had felt embarrassed about still living at home, every worry I had expressed about my financial limitations. He had known the truth the entire time. He had known exactly how much rent we paid, had known that we sometimes struggled to make payments on time, had known the precise nature of my family's economic circumstances. "I wonder what that's about," said someone from the back of the room, and nervous laughter rippled through the group. "I think it's pretty obvious what it's about," Carmen said, her voice sharp with vindication. "Rich men don't date women from rent-controlled apartments because they're looking for true love." The room erupted in uncomfortable murmurs and knowing looks. I felt like I was drowning, surrounded by people who were dissecting my relationship like it was entertainment, who were confirming every cruel assumption about why someone like Marcus would be interested in someone like me. "Maybe he didn't know initially," offered one of Carmen's friends weakly. "Oh, he knew," Carmen said, with certainty. "Property managers know their tenants, especially ones who've been late on rent as many times as we have." The humiliation was complete and devastating. Not only had Marcus been keeping this enormous secret from me, but Carmen had chosen to expose it in front of a room full of people who would never let me forget this moment. I was a joke, a cautionary tale, proof that women like me who reached too high inevitably discovered painful truths about their actual worth. I turned and fled to my bedroom without another word, slamming the door behind me and leaning against it as if I could physically block out the sound of their continued discussion. Through the thin walls, I could hear Carmen holding court, explaining to her friends how she had always known something was off about Marcus's interest in me, how she had tried to warn me but I had been too naive to listen. I sank onto my bed and stared at my phone, trying to decide what to do with this information. Should I confront Marcus immediately? Should I demand an explanation? Should I end the relationship before he could deliver whatever devastating truth was coming next? But as I sat there in the aftermath of Carmen's revelation, something began to shift in my understanding of the situation. Yes, Marcus had kept a significant secret from me. Yes, the power dynamic in our relationship was more complicated than I had realized. But nothing about his behavior toward me had changed, had it? He had still listened to my ideas with genuine interest. He had still encouraged my professional development. He had still introduced me to his colleagues as an accomplished researcher whose work he respected. The Marcus I had spent the evening with, the man who had proudly presented me to his professional circle, who had beamed when his colleagues praised my work, who had looked at me like I was the most important person in the room. That man didn't seem like someone who was playing a cruel joke on a tenant. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I looked down to see Marcus's name on the screen. "Thank you for being such an amazing partner tonight. You were brilliant with everyone you met, and I couldn't be prouder to be with you. Sleep well, beautiful." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to reconcile the Marcus who had written these words with the landlord who had been secretly collecting rent from my family. There had to be an explanation, some context, that would make sense of this apparent deception. The party in the living room was finally winding down, voices growing quieter as people said their goodbyes and headed home. I heard Carmen's laugh, bright and triumphant, as she accepted final congratulations on her promotion and her success in exposing the truth about my relationship. When the apartment finally fell silent, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Carmen's revelation destroy something important without at least understanding the full story. I was going to talk to Marcus directly, give him a chance to explain, and then decide for myself what his knowledge of our landlord-tenant relationship meant for us. I texted him back, "We need to talk. Can you meet me for coffee tomorrow morning?" His response came immediately, "Of course. Is everything okay? I'll explain tomorrow." The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I made my way to the coffee shop where Marcus and I had first really talked. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at the same table we had shared weeks ago, looking concerned and slightly confused. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately as I sat down across from him. "You seemed upset in your text." I studied his face, looking for signs of guilt or defensiveness, but all I saw was genuine worry. I found out something last night that I need to understand. Okay, he said carefully. What did you find out? That you own my apartment building. Marcus went very still, his expression shifting from confusion to something that looked like resignation. He was quiet for a long moment, clearly choosing his words carefully. Yes, he said finally. I do. How long have you known that I live in one of your properties? Since the first day we met at the library, he admitted. I recognized your last name from the tenant records. The confirmation hit harder than I had expected, even though I had known it was coming. So this entire time, while I've been worrying about my living situation and feeling embarrassed about my circumstances, you've known exactly where I stand financially. Yes. And you didn't think that was something you should mention. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I had come to recognize as a sign of stress. I should have told you immediately. I knew that from the beginning, but I didn't know how to bring it up without making things weird between us. Weirder than finding out from my sister in front of a room full of people who now think you're slumming it with a tenant. The pain in my voice must have been obvious, because Marcus's expression crumpled. Eunice, is that what you think this is, that I'm slumming? I don't know what to think. I said honestly. I don't know why someone in your position would be interested in someone in mine, and now I find out you've been keeping this huge secret from me. What am I supposed to conclude? Marcus leaned forward, his voice urgent. You're supposed to conclude that I was an idiot for not being honest from the start, but that my feelings for you are completely genuine. You're supposed to know that every conversation we've had, every moment we've spent together, every word of encouragement I've given you about your work and your potential, all of that has been real, but you must have thought about the implications. The power imbalance, the fact that you literally hold the lease to my home. Of course I thought about it, Marcus said immediately. It's been eating at me for weeks, but by the time I realized how much I cared about you, it felt too late to bring up without destroying everything we had built. So you decided to just never mention it. I decided to wait until we were serious enough that you would trust me to handle the situation appropriately, he said. I was planning to tell you this weekend actually. I've been trying to figure out the right way to explain everything. I wanted to believe him, but Carmen's voice echoed in my head, reminding me that men like Marcus didn't end up with women like me, that there was always a hidden agenda when someone seemed too good to be true. How do I know you're not just saying what you think I want to hear? I asked quietly. Marcus was quiet for a moment, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder. Because I've already taken steps to remove the conflict of interest. He slid the folder across the table to me. Open it. With trembling fingers I opened the folder to find a stack of legal documents. The top page was a property transfer agreement, transferring ownership of the Riverside Heights apartment complex from Meridian Properties to a nonprofit housing foundation. I've been working on this for 3 weeks, Marcus explained as I stared at the paper. Selling the property to a foundation that specializes in affordable housing preservation. The sale will be final next month, and all existing tenants will have their current lease terms honored indefinitely. I looked up at him in shock. You're selling the building? I'm transferring it to an organization that can better serve the residents' long-term interests, he corrected. I never should have been your landlord while we were developing a relationship. This removes that complication entirely, but you'll lose money on this, won't you? This is a valuable property, Marcus shrugged. Some things are more important than profit. Besides, the foundation will maintain the affordability standards better than a private company could. It's the right thing to do, regardless of our relationship. I stared at the documents, trying to process what this meant. Marcus hadn't just acknowledged the ethical problem of our situation, he had taken concrete steps to resolve it, even at personal financial cost. This wasn't the behavior of someone who was playing games or taking advantage of a power imbalance. Why didn't you tell me you were doing this? Because I wanted to have everything finalized before I brought it up. I didn't want you to think I was making empty promises or trying to manipulate the situation. We sat in silence for several minutes while I absorbed the implications of what he had shown me. Finally, I looked up to meet his eye. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Anything. Did you approach me that first day at the library because you recognized my name from tenant records? No, he said immediately. I approached you because you were using research materials I needed, and I was hoping we could share the table. I didn't connect your name to the apartment complex until after we had introduced ourselves and started talking about our work, and once you made the connection, I should have said something right then, he admitted. But you were so brilliant and interesting, and I was already attracted to you, and I didn't want to complicate what felt like the beginning of something special. So you decided to compartmentalize it. I decided to be a coward about it, he corrected. And I'm sorry for that. I should have trusted you to handle the information maturely instead of assuming it would ruin everything between us. I believed him, not because his explanation was perfect, but because everything else about our relationship supported his version of events. The way he had encouraged my professional development, the way he had introduced me to his colleagues, the way he had treated my work and opinions with respect, none of that suggested someone who saw me as just a tenant to be entertained. I was so humiliated last night, I said quietly. Carmen made it sound like our entire relationship was some kind of joke, like you were amusing yourself with the poor girl from the cheap apartments. Marcus's expression hardened. Your sister is wrong about me, and she's wrong about you. You're not a poor girl from cheap apartments. You're an accomplished researcher whose work influences policy decisions, who impressed every person you met last night with your intelligence and insight. Where you live doesn't define your worth. It feels like it does sometimes, only because you've been surrounded by people who measure value by the wrong standards, Marcus said firmly. I don't care where you live or how much money you make or what your family thinks about your choices. I care about who you are, your mind, your heart, your integrity, your passion for making the world better through your work. The sincerity in his voice broke through the last of my defensive walls. I was so afraid you were too good to be true. I'm not too good to be true, Marcus said with a small smile. I'm just someone who recognizes quality when I see it. And you, Eunice Powell, are exceptional quality. We talked for another hour working through the practical implications of the property transfer and the emotional aftermath of the previous night's revelation. By the time we left the coffee shop, I felt cautiously optimistic about our future together. But I knew the real test would come when I returned home to face Carmen. I found her in the kitchen, looking slightly hungover but satisfied as she cleaned up the remnants of the previous night's party. She looked up when I entered, her expression carefully neutral. How did your conversation with Marcus go? She asked. Better than you probably hoped, I said calmly. Carmen raised an eyebrow. He had a good explanation for hiding the fact that he's your landlord. He had an explanation, I correct. Whether it's good enough is my decision to make, not yours. Eunice, I was trying to protect you. No, I interrupted, surprising both of us with the firmness in my voice. You were trying to prove that you were right about me. You were trying to confirm that I'm not capable of attracting someone genuinely successful, that any man who seems interested in me must have ulterior motives. Carmen's expression shifted to defensive anger. That's not fair. I've always supported you. You've always managed me, I correct. You've spent years telling me what I should want, who I should date, what career path I should pursue, what I should expect from life. But you've never once asked what would actually make me happy, because what would make you happy isn't realistic, Carmen snapped. You can't just want whatever you want and expect the universe to provide it. Some of us have to work with what we've got. And what is it that I've got, according to you? Carmen was quiet for a moment, clearly realizing she had walked into a trap. You know I didn't mean it like that. Actually, I think you meant it exactly like that. I think you believe I'm not good enough for someone like Marcus, and it bothers you that he might disagree. It bothers me that you're setting yourself up for heartbreak, Carmen said, but her voice lacked conviction. Or maybe it bothers you that I might be capable of more than you've always insisted I was. Maybe it bothers you that someone sees potential in me that you've never acknowledged. The words hung between us like a challenge. Carmen's face cycled through several emotions before settling on something that looked like defeat. I got the impression last night that Marcus is quite serious about you, she said finally, her voice small. He is, and that his colleagues respect your work. They do. Carmen nodded slowly, as if processing information that didn't fit her long-held assumptions. I suppose I owe you an apology for how I handled things last night. You owe me more than that, I said gently. You owe me the chance to make my own decisions about my life,
even if they don't match what you think is realistic or safe. We stood in silence for several minutes, years of misunderstanding and misdirected protection, settling between us like dust. Finally, Carmen spoke again. He really transferred the building to a non-profit? He did. That's actually pretty impressive. Most people would have just found a way to justify the conflict of interest. Marcus isn't most people. Carmen smiled wryly. No, I'm beginning to understand that he is. 3 months later, I submitted my graduate school applications with strong letters of recommendation from Dr. Harrison, Marcus's colleague Sarah, and 2 of the professionals I had met at the company reception. Marcus helped me prepare for the interviews, and when the acceptance letters arrived, he was the first person I called. 6 months after that, Carmen asked me to be her maid of honor at her wedding to Brad. During her speech at the rehearsal dinner, she surprised everyone by talking about how proud she was of my decision to pursue graduate school, how impressed she had been by my academic achievements, and how happy she was that I had found someone who appreciated my unique quality. It wasn't a complete transformation of our relationship, but it was a beginning. A year later, Marcus proposed to me on the same hiking trail, where we had first talked about my potential for graduate school. The ring was beautiful, but what I treasured more was the speech he gave about wanting to build a life with someone who challenged him intellectually and inspired him to be a better person. When we announced our engagement, Carmen was genuinely enthusiastic. She even offered to help plan the wedding, though she couldn't resist suggesting that I might want to consider a more expensive venue than I had initially chosen. Some things, I suppose, never change. But as I stood in the apartment that Marcus no longer owned, reading congratulatory messages from the professors and professionals who had become my graduate school mentors and career advisors, I realized that the most important thing had changed completely. I had finally learned to see myself through my own eyes instead of through the limitations others had imposed on me. I had discovered that my worth wasn't determined by my living situation or my unconventional career path, or my failure to meet someone else's definition of success. I was Eunice Powell, graduate student in urban planning, researcher whose work influenced real policy decisions, partner to a man who valued my mind as much as my heart. I was exactly who I had always been, but now I finally understood that who I was had always been the girl who had once hidden in her bedroom after being publicly humiliated about her romantic prospects, was now planning a wedding to the man who owned her apartment building. But more importantly, she was building a career and a life based on her own strengths and passions, rather than other people's expectations. Carmen had been wrong about what no man would want. But then again, Carmen had been wrong about a lot of things. And for the first time in my life, I was completely okay with proving her wrong. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.